Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt, where we explore the science and practice of compassion and related topics of empathy, sympathy, helpfulness, mindfulness, and finding ways to effectively alleviate and prevent suffering in others and ourselves. Today, I'm excited to introduce Brendan Murphy. Brendan is an accredited counsellor, supervisor and trainer specialising in evidence-based approaches that aim to make work in healthcare and social care both more effective and more satisfying. With 30 years of experience across frontline and managerial roles, he brings a wealth of knowledge from diverse settings in health and social care. Brendan holds master's degrees in both health promotion and psychotherapy and is a dear colleague of mine from the Motivational Interviewing network of trainers. His approach to helping people through life's hardest moments is grounded in empathy, emotion regulation, and trauma-informed care. Today we'll dive into his insights on empathy, including its multifaceted nature, the positive impacts and potential misuse of empathy, and the importance of compassion in ethical practice. We'll also explore the role of non-verbal communication in expressing empathy. And so I bring you Brendan Murphy. Rightio. Well, welcome Brendan Murphy to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks very much. Delighted to be here. Yeah.
Delighted as well to see you. And we've just been madly chatting about all things, we just suddenly thought, oh, we better press record and get going, I suppose.
Mm. Yeah, it says that we don't use up all the good stuff in the pre-podcast chat. Get back to talking about some of what we agreed to speak about here.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm very keen to speak with you. You've featured a few times on Motivational Interviewing and Beyond, which is another wonderful podcast, Motivational Interviewing focused. You and I were on there together some years ago, but you were invited back, I suppose, which was good. The last one, I just found it really moving. I sort of see you a little bit as the therapist's therapist, and I don't want to kind of, put too much pressure on you, but I do find your thoughtfulness and wisdom very, very inspiring. And you were talking about a number of things on that particular podcast. And I thought I might start in a particular area, which is really just in and around empathy, because empathy seems to be somewhere there at the heart of motivational interviewing. It's definitely a part of compassion and compassion-focused therapy. It really is the core and very evidence-based aspect to trying to be helpful. And yet it's complicated, or there's a lot to it, and there's sort of different aspects to it and certain barriers to it and that sort of thing. So I wondered if we could start there. What's your perspective on empathy?
Yeah, it's I suppose it just even in coming into this conversation when we emailed originally about it and kind of it's caused me to stop and think. And as you said, because there's so much of it through MI and long before MI going back, but because it's so much part of what we do and talk about training others in motivational interviewing, that there's so many parts to it. It's like one of those things about, it's like, what's your take on weather? There's a lot of it
Yes.
about. Okay. And it's
Yeah.
like that with empathy. It's like we could go down numerous different paths around where we are about empathy. But look, of the basis of it is that thing of feeling into something else. And when I talk about empathy with people on trainings or when I'm working with clients or supervisees or something like that, my my sense of it is oh, this is how I think and talk about empathy, and this is how I do it, and the two of those often don't match up. So
Right.
that's something that I've been trying to pay attention to over the last while. And it's helped me simplify a lot of what I say about empathy when I'm in trainings and when I might be talking with a supervisee about ways of being empathic with clients.
Mm.
It's like, oh, when you actually look at all my words around it and what I actually do, they don't match up sometimes.
Mm. Mm.
And that's caused me to just simplify it a little bit. So I talk now more about feeling into, because that's really what I find I do with clients. Is
Mm.
like I try and feel into what it is that they're doing, which is it's just I mean there's no rocket science in this, and that's the
Mm.
some of the core definition of empathy.
Mm.
This thing
Yeah.
of just feeling into, the being in someone else's shoes, the that part of it there, and we so many other paths we could go down, and hopefully we will go down
Mm.
around empathy. But just that thing of going back to, all right, if we keep our conversations around empathy very close to that sense of what it's like to feel into, that keeps us very close to what we should be doing, and it reveals some of the stuff around the darker parts around empathy, the parts we spoke about at that last motivational interviewing and beyond podcast about harm, about when we can harm people, and sometimes our intentions to do well don't come across so well, and some of those things maybe Paul Bloom wrote about around against empathy, and who was the other person around the dark sides of empathy.
Mm.
Fritz. I'm sorry, I can't remember his surname. Fritz Breithung or something, a German
Okay.
sounding name, perhaps.
Mm.
But
I don't know
the
that one. Mm.
yeah. Wonderful, wonderful book on again the darker aspects of empathy, and looking about that in sadism, narcissism, psychopathy, and parts around that. So when we stay close to this thing of feeling into, we can then maybe, if we pay attention to ourselves, saying, well, why am I feeling into this part and that part? And it could be because I have my own needs being met here or something like that. And then that can tip us into some of the other darker parts of it. But equally, by feeling into something, we can also touch on which part is really helpful to feel into here with a person, because we can't feel into everything a person feels. So we're being selective with our empathy all the time about which part we feel into. And why we feel into some parts rather than others, that's another rabbit hole we could go down.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
All right.
yeah, I've kind of gone on a little bit of a merry dance there, maybe, but I suppose what I'm just thinking about what I've said there is that I'm trying to really simplify what I mean by empathy and keep it close to what I do, and then try and pay attention to myself while I'm doing it. That's
Yes. Yeah.
that's as
It's
much as
it's um it's occurred to me that in some ways motivational interviewing is feeling into and then drawing out, or feeling
hmm
into and then bringing forth. That there's a
mm,
sort of that's in a way that the little dance there, perhaps in terms of, there's fairly profound and detailed approach that we all know and love, and yet
mm,
simplifying exactly what we might be doing there. And intention matters by the sounds of
mm.
it, and motivation matters as well. What are we bringing our empathy to? What is it
Yeah,
that we're targeting our empathy to feel into? And what's
yeah,
the motive there? Are we doing so in order to sort of understand and be helpful, or are we doing
mm,
so because we want to understand so we can achieve another aim? Perhaps
mm,
an aim that might be more self-serving, even in the
yeah,
case of some of the dark side. And so, but sometimes that can just be unconscious processes too. We're not
Yes.
necessarily being evil about our empathy or something like
Mm.
that, but our empathy is focusing in on certain things. What's the intention behind that? What's the motivation there? Are there unconscious processes or biases or other things that might be influencing the bit that we feel into?
Yeah, and it's really important. Like the conversation about intention is really important because it's shaped by so many things. So, say for a lot of my work career, I've worked in addiction settings, and whether, in addiction treatment organizations, community, some residential, and then when you look at, if we just take that as one topic, that you go, okay, motivational interviewing as an approach, or any other kind of treatment approach in the addiction setting, but you just take it like that. There's so many things that shape a worker's intention there. And I mean, this is, you don't have to be a therapist, obviously. You could be working there as a support worker, you could be doing any number of things like that. But the intention can be shaped by, okay, I'm working in this service and this is their philosophy and I got to work to their philosophy. So this project that I work in was set up this way, and we might have a very harm reduction focus, or we might have a very abstentionist focus, and I got to work to that. So first of all, the rules that operate, the culture in this workplace that I'm in, that's going to shape my intentions in some way.
Mm.
The second obvious one for me in looking at that would be my training. If I've been trained in this approach and I intend to kind of stick with this approach and use it, then that's obviously what I've been trained in is going to shape how I hear words from clients and what I'll say back to clients. So that's another one that's going to shape it around that. Third is then the person sitting in front of you. I mean, like, you mentioned unconscious there. Sometimes you sit down in front of someone and immediately you feel a bit different because some level they're reminding you of somebody you may not be fully aware of, but you feel different. Who they remind you of or what it is that they say. And that's going to actually shape your intention of what you're going to do around working with this person. And then there's content, the actual words that a person will say to you and how those land on your values. And not to be too airy fairy about values, but your values being just that thing about what's important to you, what's really important to you. And if someone is talking about something that you find deeply offensive in some way to your values, what that does to your intention in working with them. So, just those kind of first few things that are almost like about what happens where you meet the person and when you meet them. There's kind of four maybe things that'll shape your intention. And that doesn't touch on how you are on the day. Have you had breakfast? Have you had an argument before leaving for work? Have you had a coffee today? Whatever it is. There's
Mm.
so many things that that shape this stuff, and yet we're meant to turn up and be Mr. and Mrs. Empathy, and
Mm.
Mr. and Mrs. Compassion, and Mr. and Mrs. Understanding of other people. And we're buffeted by so many things.
Mm. Yep.
And really at the heart of this is having a little bit of that kind of compassionate self-understanding. Just makes the world a difference to kind of go, okay, I can have 5 or 6 different things banging against me, clattering against me on any day that's going to immediately shape how I am in these conversations with people. And it's like, I gotta give myself the benefit of the doubt here that with all of these things going on, that I can still try, I'm still trying to show up for another person.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's kind of just some of the things
Yeah,
that.
the There's
Which,
there's there's definitely kind of contextual, organizational, systemic factors.
mm,
There's kind of client factors, or whoever that
mm,
person is that you're kind of trying to empathize with. There's I guess therapist or clinician factors, our background and training, but also just kind of our own sort of mental state, our own physical state, depending on what's been happening in the day. Much
mm,
harder to empathize when a bit threat system activated, for example.
yeah,
When we're in a bit of a fight flight mode, it's very difficult to sort of slow that down and to really engage, feeling into a person in a way that's helpful. In fact, there's kind of like a calmness that we might aspire to, a composure that we might aspire to as a kind of a preparation for empathizing, for being
mm,
at least within ourselves,
mm,
kind of ready and able to empathize in a way that is kind of self-aware and more effective, more accurate
mm,
in
mm,
empathy. You're sort of describing empathy in terms of perhaps internally what's happening there for the person who's being empathic.
mm.
What's it then look like externally? What's the empathic person perhaps then doing to try to enact this thing?
Mm. The For me, it's one of the things that's always kind of really kind of caught my attention is that there's so much of this that comes in eye contact, and there's a transmission of something that happens with eye contact that for me is more than it's certainly more than the sum of the parts of this thing of like, okay, we know that we're looking at somebody, because if you think of it as something like stand a kind of romantic movie, oh, their eyes locked across a crowded room or something like that, and you kind of think about, okay, well, what is that actually happens between people? And culturally, then that's hugely varied, about when it's okay to look at people in the eyes and when it's not. And then on an interpersonal level, around people's own level of personal comfort with that. So that you have some people just find it so difficult because it can trigger lots of different emotions for people depending on the kind of quality of eye contact. And but so for me on the outside, there is something really special that's very often not well defined, that you can see on the empathy on the outside when you're looking at it happening between people. Something special is happening very often in eye contact.
I
Um,
really, yeah, this is
and
great because it's definitely the real subtleties of it, isn't it? I
mm,
often say that we might listen with our eyes as much as our ears, because we're
mm,
watching or observing and so on. But we're
mm,
actually, you're right, we're sort of empathizing with our eyes as
mm,
well.
mm,
There's very subtle types of gaze or sort of even, I guess, the facial expression perhaps that
mm,
goes with that that
mm.
that conveys something. And when you're texting with someone, you don't get it. When you're on a
Yep,
phone call with them, you don't really
yep,
get that bit. When you're on
yep,
telehealth, you don't even really get it because
yep,
both parties are looking at the screen, not looking up at the
mm,
camera type thing. And so
yep.
it's just in the face to face, isn't it, where this eye contact piece actually can do its thing.
Yeah, and this is the thing. When I've taught myself, and I'm trying to do it now. Okay, so on
Mm,
my monitor here in front of me, I've got you and me, and then I've got my camera, which is just a couple of inches above your eyes. But
mm,
I've taught myself in since COVID and all of that, and
yeah.
doing so much more online work now and stuff, to speak to the lens, to talk to the lens, so that I suppose I would appear to you to be looking at you, whereas I'm not looking directly at you. You're in my vision, but I'm looking to the lens as I'm speaking to you,
Yes.
because
Specifically
it's a
for this
little bit
reason.
more, yeah, because it seems a little bit more kind of connected that way. But
Mm.
you have this, and interestingly, there's a couple of different platforms and stuff that are out there now that are making adjustments for that. And some of the devices I read about, one of the newer options on one of Microsoft Surface Pros is that you can actually set the camera so that when you're looking at the person's face, the camera makes an adjustment on their screen to your eyes, and it changes your eyes very slightly so as
Ah,
that it appears like you're looking at them. So you're, if I'll exaggerate for a second, now I'm looking at your face, Stan, on my screen. Now I'm looking at the lens. I don't
yes.
have to do that. Obviously, I'm trying to exaggerate, but
Yes.
some of the newer software and hardware is now actually being able to accommodate for that,
Mm.
to try and make this connection more real. And that's not saying there, like there's so many other parts to empathy. Like you said, you can be it can be a very empathic. There's something in tone of voice,
Mm.
intonation, the tonal quality of voice. There is as well. But when your first thing about when you said what does it look like, there is
Mm.
certainly something in eyes.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And if I could even go a step further with that, we know that people who would be recognized as being on an autistic spectrum, and that people who have one of the features for people with autism that they have difficulty with, for some people, is around eye contact and maintaining eye contact with people. We also, you may well have known about where people have that thing of the psychopathic stare, a particular coldness that people speak about in terms of the people who would be, I suppose, on antisocial personality disorder or classic psychopathy and stuff like that. One of the traits that people often have a particular cold type of stare, that there's no warmth in the gaze.
Mm.
Same thing would happen in terms of for narcissism, that there's a particular sort of predatory sort of gaze.
Mm.
And these things are, there's times there where it's really difficult to to create or maintain an empathic connection, because there is something different about quality of the gaze or
Of the
quality of the
gaze.
look. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. It's funny because my poor dear Labrador Bruno is gone now, unfortunately, but he was a very dear, compassionate friend, and the eye contact there was even a part of it, really. I mean, he had
yeah.
these beautiful hazel kind of eyes, or
Mm,
caramel eyes, I might even say.
mm,
And yes, even there you could sense the warmth and so on.
yeah,
We're highly attuned to it, I guess,
yeah,
as a species. We're very
yeah.
attuned to gaze and the different things that gaze might communicate and so
Mm,
on.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
No, we totally are. I'm really sorry to hear about Bruno. I'm
Yeah,
really sorry, because I'm a dog lover,
yeah.
and our own dog Charlie. I mean, it's just um oh, I'll well up if I start thinking about, when you're saying about Bruno,
Yes,
and like I just he's getting old now, and
yes.
we've started to have the conversations about him
Right.
old and things like that. So it is, I
Yeah.
mean, that loving look that
Yes.
dogs can give you in that sort of way, and you feel it very, very deeply.
Very deeply. And it's
Yeah.
it's different to cats too.
Yep.
Cats don't look at you in the same way, although I do have a cat
Yeah.
or two as well. But no, yes, he passed in October, and so we're still getting a little bit used to it. But yes, the thing is that he gave me that gift as well. I know that feeling. I know that feeling of warmth and friendliness and love and kind of empathy of his own sort, I suppose. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm kind of personifying him in some way or that sort of thing. But so with empathy, there's something in the intention and kind of
Mhm.
bringing awareness to that. There's something in the sort of the feeling into and kind
Mhm.
of noticing what am I feeling into and how does that meet my intention. There's something in the real subtleties of eye contact. It's subtle, but it's not simple, and it's also
Yeah.
extremely powerful. Just eye contact, facial expression, voice tone. That's sort of
Mhm.
almost where it starts. What next? What comes next, do you think?
Yeah, in that it's I suppose I have a sense of this of when being empathic, we're walking a fairly thin line
Okay.
with people, and that there's all of these things, the various things that we mentioned in our example earlier about, you're buffeted on how you are on any given day and all of those things. But also to, and this is where it's important to talk about things like the potential for harm, because empathy
Mm.
is not always good. It's about our own personal needs, which can be come to the fore more self-serving than serving an other. Even though we're in the role of being a helper to another, we're often driven by our own needs like that, and sometimes they actually take over and get in the way and cause harm. So that because we're being empathic, we're not always being helpful. I think it's a sometimes an uncomfortable statement, but I think it's a fair statement to make. Something that's more uncomfortable and not always fair to say, but it does feature, is that sometimes we are actually harmful because we're pursuing our own needs in front of those of the ones there, and that causes people discomfort to actually even reflect on sometimes.
Mm.
But it's this thin line that we're walking on. Then is a little bit around. I kind of put it under the heading of, there's a bit of self-awareness or self-attunement in this, about going, what's happening for me here? And this is where it's important, I think, for us to just recognize we are shaped by a lot of emotions day to day. There's a lot of emotional forces that are at work in the background, usually in subtle ways, and then they burst out when an emotion kind of really comes to the fore, is where it's kind of bursting out as like a really obvious example of where you're belly laughing and you're really enjoying something, or where you have like some sort of explosion of anger, or where you just really withdraw into that collapse of sadness, or that you fall into some sort of shame pit about something. They're the obvious sort of ones about emotions, but that I think we got to really guard against the fact, oh, I'm not being very emotional here. It's like, no, you're not having a big emotional expression, but there's an awful lot of emotions that are moving around there under and close to the surface.
Mm.
And those are really worthwhile kind of paying attention to in yourself. So that's why I kind of put them in under the self-attunement or self-awareness kind of category, about what's happening in my exchange with this person.
Yeah.
Because our emotions are, I'm I don't want to be absolute about this, and I want to declare I'm tilting more and more towards emotions are so influential in what we're doing. I'm kind of going, I I can't believe I didn't focus on this sooner. you know,
Gotcha.
because there's so much stuff stirring within ourselves when we start to pay attention to it.
Mm.
Mm,
Yes, there's sort of it's a funny one because in some ways empathy could be kind of a source of harm for the other.
mm-hmm,
And empathy could be a kind of a source of harm for ourselves. We're
mm-hmm,
really having to bring that self-awareness in and really understanding intentions, motivations, emotions. Um, where do you see sympathy fitting in? Because I suppose that's something that occurred to me there is that when we're empathizing and we're feeling emotions of our own,
mm,
that might be what I would think of as sympathy. It's not so much the empathy, the feeling the emotions of the other, but kind of noticing that there are emotions of our own bubbling up to the surface. We
mm,
might be feeling sadness for their suffering, for example,
mm,
or that sort of thing. So, what are your thoughts on empathy and sympathy?
mm. Just a couple of minutes ago, there, if just what immediately strikes me is just what happened between you and me just a couple of minutes ago there, Stan, when you were speaking about Bruno.
Mm,
You know, because I we've never spoken about Bruno before. I didn't know there even ever was a Bruno. And when you said that, he's no longer here, and I immediately dropped into just a different sort of sadness, a quality of sadness, but a sadness that wasn't my own. It was a sad for you.
okay.
And then you might what I did is I spoke to you about my dog and about Charlie, and the sounds odd even saying this, just a little bit of relief, Stan, that I'm not in your shoes.
Mm, I
That I
see.
still have Charlie, even though it's tremendously sad what we might be facing into with him.
Yes.
So it's a sadness for, not a sadness within. It was a sadness for you and
Mm,
what you've gone through and are going through, but also sympathy has a little bit of a self-protection part to it as well,
I see.
where it's like I I kind of made it about me and about Charlie and me, even though you were speaking about that, and that might be something like you see something on TV about some terrible tragedy in a family, and you go hug your kids really tightly, because you feel for that other thing, or maybe you go to a funeral, and that night, you're in bed thinking about, well, he's in bed alone tonight, whereas he always had his partner before that. And if you're lucky enough to be in bed with somebody that you love, that you hold them just a little bit tighter that night.
Mm,
So that there's really something in that about that thing of feeling for someone else, but there's also that kind of there's a self-protection, there's a gratitude, and there's a kind of a almost something a little bit sort of primal about I gotta mind my people, I gotta mind me and who's
mm,
with me here at the moment.
yeah. Yes, it's a feeling for, but it's not that it simply bounces off us either.
Yeah.
We do feel something. We're feeling a sadness for the person,
Mm,
and yet the sadness is our own feeling.
mm,
We're the
mm.
one feeling the sadness.
Yep.
It's just that we're feeling it for that person and what they're going through.
Mm,
And it doesn't just bounce off us though. It also creates other thoughts and feelings. Sometimes
yep.
it might be relief or gratitude that there but by the grace of God go I sort of a feeling.
Yep.
But it might also create a little anxiety. I'll probably be there one day too, or
Yep.
things can happen, and
Mm, mm,
it sort of also tunes us back into what's important to us, perhaps,
mm,
and we might go to our own Charlie and give him a big hug after this or something like that. So
Hmm.
it's an interesting one as well. I feel like empathy and sympathy are a bit of a pigeon pair in a way, although they're
Hmm.
also both things to be careful with. Just like
Yeah.
with empathy, we're needing to have that self-awareness. So too with sympathy, because I guess we're not
Mm.
wanting to then go ahead and make it all about ourselves or something like that.
Yes.
And yet
Yes.
we do want to feel a bit moved by what the person's going through and relate to it a little bit in our own way so that we, that kind of connects our empathy to a desire to help, I suppose. Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that touches then in on compassion, which is like witnessing suffering and the intention to help, to do something about it.
Yes.
Then as opposed to it's maybe it's crooked cousin or evil twin or something like that, where you have people where they're just going around, feeling into all sorts of other pain, the sort of I know you had a piece on your channel about toxic compassion,
Ah,
and where people talk about compassionate narcissism, this idea of feeling into all of these things, but for not out of fellow feeling for the other person, but actually out of just an emotional rush within ourselves.
mm,
This idea of just generating emotion in ourselves to almost create a little bit of inner weather, inner drama, inner something.
mm.
Yeah.
Yes, it's empathy without the sympathy, and
Yep.
instead of sympathy, it's something else. It's pleasure almost, or at least the enjoyment of the drama somehow.
Yes.
I know
Yeah.
Paul Gilbert, the developer of compassion focused therapy, who I often quote on this channel. He sort of says, the last thing you would want is an empathic torturer, because
Yes. Yeah.
if they were able to see right through you and
Mm.
empathize, it doesn't sound right to say it like that, but to sort
Mm.
of really be able to feel into what's going to cause you the most pain,
Mm.
then that would be is terrifying indeed. It would
Yeah.
be certainly empathy without sympathy and without
Yes.
any intention to be helpful, an intention to be
Yeah.
cruel, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. And Paul's like when I read that, it just struck me so clearly. He just nailed it really with that. But when we talk about kind of, and even if you go all the way to kind of movie villains of psychopaths and things like
Okay.
that, that's what they are. That there are some people who have a particular set of skills for finding out what really makes you tick and using that against you.
Yes.
And we don't have to go with DSM type definitions of, as I mentioned already, antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder or anything like that. We don't have to have tick all of the boxes for that, but we know people are more skilled at being able to read and take advantage of people and use people's personality and characteristics against themselves to for their own benefit. For that someone uses someone's part of a person's personality, uses that against that person for the first person's benefit.
Mm. It
Mm.
reminds me of how Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick included compassion into the spirit of MI for the first time, because that was
Mm.
not quite as sort of at the severe end as that, but they were aware that people might bring motivational interviewing to other kinds of tasks, such as
Mm.
sales,
Yeah.
and not that there's anything wrong with that in particular. It's just that they felt that MI was different to that, because MI really needs to be about the health and well-being of that other person. And so
Mm.
we're wanting to bring empathy to all of that, but we're wanting to do it in the spirit of compassion, where we have our heart in the right place, and we have that intention to be helpful, and to not be doing things out of self-interest, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not much of one for kind of check boxes and lists of things like that, but it is actually important that we have a few boundaries around saying what MI is appropriate for and what it's
Mm.
not appropriate for. There's like every boundary that I know of will have at least one part of it where you could go, well, that bit's a bit grey there, but there's where we should have some kind of black and white lines about things, about saying
Mm.
on this side of the line that's okay, on that side it's not okay. There, like I said, there'll always be something grey in some areas, but
Mm.
yeah, where you're actually going, okay, one of the markers around MI for me is there something here that the person is considering changing, and that by doing so or not doing so will have a direct impact on their health or well-being?
Mm.
Is it something about change? Is there something about change that will have an impact on their well-being? And even within that, there's a bunch of areas we should not touch. We should stay well away from, Bill would have written and spoken about this. It's none of our business to be advising, helping, guiding people whether they should get divorced or shouldn't get divorced, whether they should have a child or shouldn't have a child. That's the sort of game we shouldn't have any skin in around that. And then other people say, well, no, hang on a second. What about, having a child? And that if this woman has a child, she may well die, and there's a very high possibility of this if she goes ahead with that. How could I kind of just be, you know, in equipoise about that? Or how could I, if this is about someone's in a domestic violence relationship and about like divorcing or separating from that person, how could I be this way about that? There are some things that we should stay well away from, and then there's these gray areas that we've got to be really, really careful about our use of empathy in
Mm.
these,
Yes.
because it's empathy comes and sympathy and compassion and these things. There are these areas, and this is why I frequently kind of I try and keep it very, very general, but I say ethics underpins everything that we do.
Mm.
You're training as a therapist, and there's a couple of lectures, and you might have to write a paper on ethics, or you got to read some papers on ethics and stuff like that. And people kind of go tick box and move away from that. It's like, no, that's actually the day-to-day stuff about what we're dealing
Mm.
with.
Big choices, and
Big
there's
stuff.
there is always grey areas, and we try to bring practicality a bit to it, I suppose, as well. But I suppose my thought too is whose direction is it that we're taking? And if
Mm.
it's a bit too much my direction that I'm taking on behalf of the other person, then that's worth noticing and deciding on, I suppose.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, because it's not to kind of just fall back too much on the metaphor, but there is the thing of the dance in this. We're in the conversation. We are really important in the conversation when we're doing the work we do, but yet it's not about us.
Mm.
That's the thing, So it's
Yes.
it's like which,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's like, am I leading? Am I following? In the idea of a dance, am I dancing or wrestling? We talked about a lot in MI for years, in terms of,
Mm.
am I trying to struggle with this too much?
Mm.
Jeff Allison's lovely, lovely thing of dancing or wrestling that he came up with years ago is
Mm.
a lovely way of saying, am I trying to guide it too much, or am I in a nice movement and flow? We're really important in the conversation, but yet it's not about us.
Mm. So if we turn our mind to the person who is receiving the empathy or being empathized with,
mm,
What does that feel like for them, would you say?
mm, mm. It's so it's morning time here, and I know it's evening time with you because I'm in the west of Ireland and you're on the Gold Coast, so in Australia. So we're on pretty much opposite sides of the planet.
I was thinking that.
So yeah, when you emailed me earlier this morning, my time, and I immediately thought of a client I was having a session with just yesterday evening,
Hmm.
and quite late in the session, only a few minutes before the end, this woman said to me, and we speak weekly. We have a session for once a week, and we're 6 months in now into therapy. And the woman has a very extensive history of a lot of different traumas in her life. And quite late in the session last night, she said, "I've been wondering when you're going to start pushing." And it just caught my attention, so I fell back on that old kind of therapist line of, tell me a bit more about that, you know? And it's like, but we were almost at the end of the session. So she said, I've just been thinking about something, and she said, "I've been wondering when you're going to start pushing." So I was like a little bit surprised it was coming so late, and I thought, what am I hearing here? So I fell back on the old chestnut line of, tell me a bit more about that. And she said, "When are you going to start telling me what I need to start doing? And when are you going to start bossing me around?" And I was like, when I heard that one. So I extended the session just by a few minutes, breaking all the therapy rules, don't, keep it timed, rather than saying, we'll pick that up next week. So, just went on for a few minutes more, kind of talking about, so you're expecting me to do something different from what I have been doing? She said, "Yeah, you've been very kind. You've been very nice to me, and I know you're kind, but you've been very nice to me, and I'm wondering when that's going to end." So we had a few minutes of conversation about previous therapists that she had and other relationships that she had where people start off nice, but you can't trust nice, that they get mean. So I get an email from you this morning, and just a couple of things saying, looking forward to our chat today, and we might chat about a few different things. And one of the things in your email that you said this morning, Stan, was, how is empathy, if we could chat about what that's like for other people, and especially around trauma. So empathy, for somebody who's very traumatized, them experiencing empathy may be wonderfully healing, it may be really reassuring, it may be something that they've never had and desperately need, or maybe not or, maybe and, it may feel tremendously unsafe. And to think of Stephen Porges, when he talks about treatment for trauma, Stephen Porges had a wonderful little saying where he said, someone said, what is the best treatment for trauma? What is the treatment for trauma? And he said, safety is the treatment for trauma.
Safety
is the treatment for trauma.
Okay.
When people feel safe, they're not traumatized. When they feel unsafe, feeling unsafe is the heart of what it is in moments of being traumatized, that you are unsafe. When you feel safe, then that's healing from trauma. So the session I had last night, and I'm rethinking 6 months of sessions with this woman that I've been working with, and I'm doing a lot of stuff around empathizing, and there's a kindness, and I really, really value the connection we have. We have I genuinely feel a really deep connection to this woman.
Mm.
That what we've got is also making her feel very unsafe
Mm.
because she's waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Mm.
So that just struck me this morning when I got
Yes.
your email, which is apropos of what you're asking now.
Yeah.
How does empathy feel for people? It can feel all of the other things that we often think about and say for people, that it's really, really, it's a balm, it's soothing, it really draws something out of people, it creates safety, it actually, it's a characterization of a good therapeutic relationship, that it has a holding, containing, safe place. And in that safety, there can be a little challenge and stuff as well. But that thing, that when there is an empathy connection, an empathic connection there, that it can help create these containers of safety. And at the same time, it can leave people going, can I trust this? If I've
Mm.
never had it before and I've been hurt and rejected, harmed, or beaten or assaulted or whatever, that like, he's just being nice to me. But something more has to come.
Yes, it really is the sort of the tragedy, isn't it, of relational trauma or attachment
Mm,
trauma and so on, is that it is an end. It is
mm,
both, empathy and understanding and care and compassion. That is exactly what the person wants or needs, or is seeking. And at the very same time, it's threat system activating. It creates
yeah.
a feeling of unsafeness, or lack of safety, because of it really is that notion of conditioning, I suppose, in a way, that
Hmm.
empathy has been conditioned conditioned to sort of, be associated with a threat response,
Mm,
and fear and consternation sets in
yeah.
when the person is noticing the empathy, which I suppose means that we don't give up on it, but we
Mm,
are very aware and self-aware and mindful of how we might express our empathy, and the depths to which we might go, and we might actually just create a bit of a kind of a graduated exposure to empathy for the person, so that they can
yeah.
gradually feel more comfortable. Or what are your
Feel
thoughts?
more in it. Feel more in it. It's this is the thing of the that graduated exposure is usually, as you know, like I said, but this woman is working over the last 6 months, but this is
Mm,
usually how it happens. People have to actually kind of, you earn their trust in a way.
yeah.
You give them this empathy consistently, and they learn to trust it. So it's that graduated exposure to it, because this idea of like full on empathy, and you will fully connect with me and fully trust me, and will deeply work together from session one. That doesn't happen so much. Yeah,
Mm,
well, certainly I can't do it, as a therapist. I can't make that sort of stuff happen. Maybe
mm.
some people who really can kind of connect with people much more quickly, but that's not my experience. It is a graduated process.
Yes.
Um, if I could, one of the things I just do, Stan, just name kind of a little bit about what I do
Yes.
around this is I name it as a dialectic. So just a slightly different thing. About 10, 12 years ago now, I worked for a couple of years on in dialectic behavior therapy team, on a DBT team. And for people who know DBT as a whole other kind of treatment program and stuff like that, and quite a different approach in ways to compassion focused therapy and MI, some overlaps. But some of the things that it really, really helped me appreciate was around dialectics, which originally as a philosophy and then brought more into psychology, but this thing of the two opposing truths being present in the one moment. And that's, I think, what I experienced last night. This woman where I have a really deep, connected, therapeutic relationship with, and because of that, her truth of that, and that she finds the relationship and the work we're doing, and she says this to me, really, really helpful and really essential for her, but at the same time, as you said, the threat response is activated. Both of those things are absolutely true in the same moment. Yeah. And that one of the things I do, which you will know, as in lots of people will know, is very MI consistent, is we're saying, so it's two things. On one hand, it is this, and on one hand, it is that, Yeah. And we can talk about, but we can say, rather than, oh, this thing or that thing, we talk about it's two things at once. They are intermingled like this. And they're both true, and they're both accurate at the same time.
Yes, nice connecting back to MI and ambivalence, and we feel two ways about things, even empathy, I guess, in a funny sort of a way. It's sort of, I mean, I'm really getting the sense from this conversation that empathy is something of a skill or a competency. It's also an attitude and an intention, but it's not necessarily inherently good or something like that. Sometimes that competency can be brought to other intentions, I suppose, or other motivations, and that we're really trying to be very aware of our own minds and how we're using our empathy and what the focus is and what the intention behind it is. And we're trying to, oddly enough, empathize with how the other person is experiencing our empathy as well. That there's sort of multiple layers there, and we know that sometimes people vary in terms of how they receive empathy, especially depending on their own history and their sort of life experiences, trauma, but other experience as well. And so we're sort of empathizing with how the empathy is being received. We're also, I mean, she was very courageous, really. She probably steeled herself for this moment to sort of say, like, is this going to last? Is this going to change? Is you being nice going to stop? And so that took a lot of courage, really, from her.
Really
but,
did.
Really being able to pick up on that, on the signs or the feedback or the direct comments. What are your thoughts in terms of kind of empathy outside of therapy, really, just in the day to day, and kind of people listening who are sort of perhaps thinking about things at home or at work or on the bus. So how does empathy become a part of our daily lives, or how might we practice it there?
Yeah, it's there's a couple of things kind of happen for me when you say that. One is, and this might sound like an odd one compared to what I said, it's like there's a part of me, Stan, that doesn't care. And I want to be sort of like going, okay, this is the sort of stuff that you really don't want to know your therapist is thinking, does he actually care about this or not? But in my day-to-day thing, and it's not about saying, oh, I do empathy at work and then I don't care about anybody else. It's like it's not that sort of black and white thing, but that there is a thing about saying where with empathy around using it in a deep, connected way in therapeutic work with people, that we have that we got to be able to, and I think in this way, I think in dials, like a big old stereo, with a big knob on a big dial, like in something like that, and like dialing it up and dialing it down. And that when we think of it like a dial, or if you want to think like a slider or something like that, that you're there like that. But we gotta actually have a not just the ability to, but we actually got to exercise dialing it down.
Mm-hmm.
Actually have to. And this happened, okay, so I'm 54 now, and I started in this work way too young. So I started working in a homeless shelter when I was 19, and as a full-time volunteer, and then went on to start working a drug service in a harm reduction service when I was 20 and stuff like that. So that, but what I found once I did some kind of basic training in listening skills, I had a whole pile of clients and no friends. So I was the guy
Okay.
that would be empathizing left, right, and center with everybody. And other people in their early 20s with me maybe found me good to talk to in some way, and they would come and tell me lots of things. And my place in my friendship group really shifted. I actually became the person who listened to and took on a lot of other people's stuff, and there was very little room for me. And I made myself small in my friendship circle, and made it okay for people to come to me and talk with me about lots of things. And that had quite an effect on me. I'm pretty extrovert, I'm pretty outgoing in lots of ways. And I was the guy in school that was always getting in trouble for being loud, and people now know I'm a bit deaf in one ear. Not a good trend for a therapist to be going deaf. There's not much need for deaf therapists, but I'm a long way away from that. But what I find is, because I don't hear so well in one ear, I actually overcompensate and I'm louder than I often need to be. And my wife is like, he does this, when I'm getting loud. So yeah, turn down that dial, So this whole thing about that I had a couple of years in my 5-6 years in my 20s, where I actually found that empathizing everywhere, I started to take this on as a way of being, and it actually didn't serve me very well at all. Maybe it did, and it served me obviously in other ways, about, if you like, learning the craft of therapy, but it didn't serve me well as for the person who I was becoming in some ways, because I took on a lot of stuff because I wasn't very good at it, and I was doing a lot of listening and a lot of empathic connecting with people, and then was left with quite a lot of concern and worries. And it became a dark time for me around that time, So I remember actually kind of thinking, like, as I got maybe later 20s into my 30s, so we're talking about 25 years ago at this stage now, where I remember thinking something happened. I gotta do less of this. And that's somewhere after that the idea of the dial started to come in, about dialing it down and dialing it up.
Yeah.
So that's just some of my own thing about using it more widely, is that I think we probably all have a level within us, that on how empathic a person we tend to be. And pick a year out of your life. Okay. And here, let me actually just go a little bit clunky on this, Stan, and say, okay, age 19, pick a number between 1 and 10. How empathic a person were you? 1 is almost none, 10, super empathic. Then pick the age at 25, then 30, then 40. Pick a year in your life and kind of go, how was I then? Because hopefully it hasn't been changing wildly throughout your life, but it probably did change at different times. You know,
Mm. Mm.
babies are not empathic. Put it that way.
Right.
Babies are little narcissists. You know, it's all about babies. Like we're all born narcissists. You know, it's all about us before we know anything, and then we learn how to become more empathic. And sometimes we overlearn that, and we got to learn it a little bit less. And sometimes people get hurt and harmed and traumatized, and they become very hardened, and they dial that empathy right down. So we probably have an overall level in any given year or whatever, an average that we're at. And then we have, within that average, we have times where we selectively dial it up and selectively dial it down.
Yeah, that's really great advice actually, and I'm uh, sort of happy to hear that you and I are similar in this way. I'm 52, so thankfully I'm 2 years younger than you, so that's a good start. But
Hmm.
when I was
And so much
19,
more handsome.
when
Yeah.
I was yeah, nice one, the little you got me back, but when I was 19, I was working at Kids Helpline over here, and so very similar.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was sort of
Hmm.
listening to some very difficult stories and of young people and things they were facing, and so had an early training ground around empathy as well. I really like that idea of sort of high fidelity empathy, these different
Hmm.
dials that we might be able to just tune it a little bit up and down, and there might the dial doesn't go to the negative, so it's not that we're becoming callous in that.
Yeah.
It's we're maintaining a kind of a sort of a nice little watch on our own empathy and perhaps the impact, because it can be fatiguing. I mean, I think that's the
Mm.
empathy fatigue idea that really is out there, and it made me think too that perhaps the other area that empathy comes into daily life is we're able to empathize with people's joy and
Mm.
people's happiness or
Mm.
their sense of satisfaction or achievement, or even noticing the contentment in a friend
Mm.
and kind of
Mm.
empathizing there. So we might not only have dials that turn it up and down, but also little knobs that you know move the direction about, or something like that. And in fact, I suppose even in the therapy room, we're kind of empathizing and trying to notice those
Mm.
other emotions, those other meanings as they arise. But
Yeah.
yes, very
Yeah.
good.
And those ones, that's the gravy. That's the really good stuff about,
Mm.
that thing of, like, I actually I like weddings. Okay,
Mm.
it's like a kind of wedding, and it's like there's something really lovely about two people standing there in front of friends and family declaring you're the one for me.
Mm.
And I always get a little bit choked up at weddings, and like my wife is going, oh God, and she's like, really on, no, because I'm all like, oh, wasn't that so lovely, and wasn't that in the vows and the whole thing like that? And she goes, she's like going, yeah, it's like, dial down the feelings. It's not about you.
Oh, okay.
But it's like I am totally empathizing with the love, the joy, that stuff that they're feeling. And look, you know, getting married, you might be standing at an altar or on a beach or wherever you are. You might be really anxious in front of loads of people. But what they're doing, what they're declaring, and that thing of their love and their joy and their choice to be together, and how they're planning their life forward and what they want. I mean, like, that stuff gets me kind of teared up in a whole different way.
Mm.
And like when you're working with clients and you're there, like, and they've done really well, they've come through such adversity. I mean, like, you can really feel so happy for them, like that they've come through it. And this is here's another one, because like I was mentioning earlier about the different emotions that are at work in the background. The pride, Stan, that you can have such pride in, like, that you're going, like, I am so proud of them, that what they have done.
Mm.
But stitched into that is a little bit of pride about, you did good. This worked. It's like,
Mm.
God knows therapy doesn't work all the time. And I think of things of where it went wrong and stuff that didn't work for clients. And then I kind of, those moments where it really works well, and you can kind of go, I was part of that. And that pride, which is not declaring it from the rooftops, but it's actually just feeling that inside, going, I'm really glad I do this work and I can be part of this and make this difference in some way in a person's life.
Mm.
You know?
Yes, that sort
And
of
that, yeah,
authentic pride, isn't it? That just that real
yes,
sense of
yes,
and I was just thinking that empathy is a pathway to appreciative joy, I suppose. And
mm, mm,
there's many wonderful aspects to developing that competency, that ability, that sense of feeling into, really, that
mm,
you started
mm,
with, and that's
mm,
kind of sums it up. We're really it's a gift for us as for our species, to be able
mm,
to feel into the life and the experiences and the feelings and the meanings for another person. It creates a very precious experience and bond, I suppose, really.
mm, mm. Yeah, and it's that thing of it's happening in them, it's happening in you, and that bond that you speak about, that connection that sort of happens, that's the real richness, isn't it? That's the real richness of being human, that I am connected to you in some way.
Yeah.
Mm,
Well, I did send you an email earlier this morning, and
mm,
it provided a bit of a shotgun approach of the things that we
mm,
could talk about. But I
mm,
have been absolutely delighted with the little path we've taken, the twists and turns. There's been a lot of very fascinating things, I think, to go away and ponder, but absolutely encouraged, to do so and to continue with all of this. So, Brendan Murphy, thank you very much for being on Compassion in a T-shirt.
Listen, Stan, you're so welcome, because look, I love what you do. I love how you write and what you've written. So, in terms of that, I was just, your people on the podcast won't know this. Just before we came on camera, and you were talking about interviewing Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick and Terry Moyers and other people who are, they're giants in the field. And I said to you, prepare to be disappointed, because yeah, you can't, I could never hold a candle to people of that caliber in terms of the work that they've done. And I look at what you do and how you do it and stuff, and just being part of this is just lovely. So thank you very much, genuinely, for you've said some really kind things about me and to me, and so thank you very much for just inviting me on and having me. It's been a lovely conversation, and just a bit more again of a sense of connection between me and you. So I
Exactly.
really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love it. Thank you very much.
You're really welcome. Thanks, Stan.